Knock. The call came in at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the ceiling for an hour already, unable to sleep, running through a mental checklist of everything I needed to do before my shift at the clinic the next day. My phone lit up the entire room. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost did. My sister's name on the screen stopped me cold. Except it wasn't my sister calling, it was her neighbor, Mrs. Tite Calloway, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s, who had my number because my sister had put me down as her emergency contact for everything, her landlord, her dentist, even the HOA. That was just who my sister was. She always made sure someone could reach me if something happened to her. Something had happened to her. "Honey, I don't want to scare you," Mrs. Calloway said, and those words did the exact opposite of what she intended. "But the ambulance just left your sister's building. I saw them bring her out on a stretcher. She wasn't moving." I was already out of bed. I grabbed my keys, my coat, my shoes, not in that order, and I was in my car before I even processed what I was doing. The drive to Mercy General was 12 minutes at that hour. I made it in 8. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, cycling through every terrible possibility, landing on none of them because none of them made sense. My sister was 28 years old. She ran half marathons. She meal prepped on Sundays and took her vitamins and went to bed before 10 on weeknights. She did not get wheeled out of her apartment building on a stretcher at 3 in the morning. I pulled into the emergency parking lot and ran. The automatic doors of the ER slid open and I was hit immediately by the smell of antiseptic and recycled air, the harsh fluorescent light that made everyone look like they hadn't slept in a week. I went straight to the desk and told them my sister's name. The nurse on intake, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, typed something into his computer and then looked up at me with an expression I recognized. I'd seen it on doctors' faces before, on social workers, on anyone who had bad news they were choosing their words around. "She's been admitted," he said. "Someone from the care team will come speak with you shortly. If you can take a seat in the—" "Is she conscious?" I asked. A pause. "The doctor will come speak with you." I sat down. I did not want to sit down. I sat down anyway because there was nothing else I could do, and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and I breathed the way my therapist had taught me, slow counts in and out, and I watched the doors that led back to the treatment area and I waited. 20 minutes later, a doctor came out and told me my sister was stable but unconscious. Her blood pressure had been dangerously low when the paramedics arrived. She was showing signs of acute liver distress. They were running labs. They would know more in a few hours. I asked what could cause something like that in a 28-year-old woman with no prior medical history. The doctor said they were looking into several possibilities. He went back through the doors. I sat there alone in that waiting room with its flickering overhead light and its too cold air conditioning, and I thought about my sister, and I thought about her boyfriend, and something cold and certain settled into the center of my chest. My sister had been with him for 14 months. I'd met him the previous Christmas when she brought him home to our mother's house in Ohio. He was handsome in a polished, deliberate way, the kind of man who always knew which fork to use and laughed at exactly the right moments during other people's stories. My mother had liked him immediately. I had not. I couldn't explain it then. And I'm not sure I can explain it now, except to say that something about the way he looked at my sister felt like ownership rather than love. Like she was something he'd acquired. His name was Derek. My sister called him the best thing that had ever happened to her. She had also, over the course of those 14 months, stopped going to her book club, stopped coming to our monthly dinners, stopped calling me on Sunday mornings the way she had every week since she moved to Portland 6 years ago. Every time I mentioned it, she had an explanation. Work was busy, they'd had plans, she'd been tired. The explanations were always reasonable. They were also always slightly different from whatever she'd told me the previous time. The last time I'd seen her in person was 3 months ago. We'd met for coffee while Derek was at a conference out of town. She'd seemed fine. She'd seemed happy. I told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. I know that now. At around 6 in the morning, a nurse came out to find me. Not one of the ER nurses. This was someone in scrubs from the ICU. Older, maybe mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She introduced herself as the charge nurse on my sister's floor. She asked if I was the only family member present. I said our mother was flying in from Ohio, she'd be there by noon. The nurse nodded slowly, like she was weighing something. "There's something I need to tell you before anyone else does," she said, "and I need you to hear me out completely before you react. Can you do that?" My heart rate doubled. I nodded. "Your sister's labs came back about an hour ago. What we're seeing is not consistent with a natural medical event." She paused, watching my face. The pattern of liver enzymes, the presentation, our attending flagged it. We've seen this before, unfortunately. The combination of compounds in her system suggests ingestion over time, not a single incident. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Over time," I repeated. "Weeks. Possibly longer." I stood up. I didn't mean to. My body just moved. "There's more," the nurse said. "Her boyfriend is here. He arrived about 40 minutes ago. He's been asking questions at the nurse's station, wanting to know what room she's in, whether she's conscious, what the doctors have found." She kept her eyes on mine. "He's in the waiting room down the hall." Everything in me went rigid. "I need to see her," I said. "You will, but I need you to listen to me first." The nurse lowered her voice, though there was no one near us. "We have a protocol for situations like this. We've already called it in. But right now, nobody outside this care team knows what the lab showed. Not him. If he finds out that we're looking at this as a poisoning, before the investigators get here." She stopped. "I need you to go back to the waiting room. The regular one, not the one he's in. I need you to act like you know nothing more than what the ER doctor told you earlier. Can you do that?" "I'm a medical assistant," I said. It came out strange, like I was introducing myself at a networking event. "I work at a family practice clinic. I know what acute liver distress looks like when it's not accidental." Something shifted in her expression. "Then you understand exactly why I'm asking you to be careful right now." I understood. I understood perfectly. I went and sat in the waiting room, and I stared at a muted television showing early morning news, and I thought about every Sunday phone call I hadn't gotten, every dinner my sister had canceled, every explanation that was slightly, almost imperceptibly wrong. Derek came and found me 20 minutes later. He was wearing a fleece pullover and dark jeans, like he'd dressed quickly, but his hair was neat, and he was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cart in the lobby, one of which he offered to me with an expression of such practiced concern that I felt physically ill. "I got here as fast as I could," he said. "Do you know anything yet?" "They won't tell me anything at the nurse's station." "They said she's stable," I said. My voice came out calm. "I am still not entirely sure how. They're still running tests." He sat down next to me. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and stared at the television. "She wasn't feeling well yesterday," he said. "She said she was tired, that she might be coming down with something. I should have pushed her to see someone sooner. I feel terrible." "You couldn't have known," I said. He looked at me. For just a moment, half a second, maybe less. Something passed through his eyes that was not grief and was not worry. Then it was gone, replaced by the expression of a concerned boyfriend, and he put his hand briefly on my arm and said, "We're going to get through this." I excused myself to use the restroom. In the hallway outside the waiting room, I stopped walking and stood very still, and I pressed my back against the wall, and I breathed. The charge nurse had given me her direct number on a small piece of paper before she went back upstairs. I took it out of my pocket and I looked at it, then I looked at the doors of the elevator at the end of the hall. I made a decision. I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor and found the charge nurse at the nurse's station. I told her about Derek's comment that my sister hadn't been feeling well yesterday, that he'd noticed she was tired. I told her he'd offered to bring me coffee. I told her about the half-second look. She wrote everything down on a small notepad without reacting. "Investigators are on their way," she said quietly. "They'll be here within the hour. What I need from you is to go back downstairs and keep him in that waiting room. Don't ask him questions. Don't confront him. Just keep him there and keep him calm. What if he wants to leave? Let me know the moment that happens." She tore a second slip of paper from the notepad and handed it to me. "Text this number. Keep your phone in your hand." I went back downstairs. Derek was still in the waiting room. He'd turned his chair slightly toward the television. I sat down and I looked at the muted screen and I thought about my sister upstairs, unconscious, her liver processing whatever he had been putting into her body for weeks. I thought about all the Sunday mornings she hadn't called. I thought about Christmas, the way he'd laughed at exactly the right moments, the way he'd touched the small of her back when he thought no one was looking. Not affectionate, just proprietary, like pressing a thumb into something to mark it. I thought, how long has this been happening? I thought, what was he waiting for? I found out later, from the detective who interviewed me that afternoon, Derek had taken out a life insurance policy on my sister 8 months into their relationship. He presented it to her as something romantic, something responsible. They were building a life together, he'd said. He wanted to make sure she was protected. My sister, who trusted people because she'd been raised to believe that was a virtue, had signed the paperwork. The policy was worth $600,000. She had been tired for 4 months. She had put it down to stress, to the demands of her job, to the general accumulation of being a person in her late 20s in an expensive city. She had gone to her primary care doctor in February and been told her iron was a little low and she should try to eat more leafy greens. The compound Derek had been adding to her food and her drinks in small, consistent doses wasn't something a standard blood panel would catch. He'd done research. He'd been careful. He had, in all likelihood, done this before. The detective told me later that they were already in contact with law enforcement in 2 other states regarding cases involving women. Derek had dated before my sister. I did not know any of this while I sat next to him in the waiting room. I knew only that my sister was upstairs and that I needed to keep him in that chair. He left twice to use the restroom. Both times I texted the number the charge nurse had given me. Both times I came back. At 9:15, he said he was going to go get breakfast from the cafeteria and asked if I wanted anything. I said no thank you. I texted the number. He came back 14 minutes later with a breakfast sandwich he didn't eat. The investigators arrived at 9:40. I didn't see them come in. I found out afterward that they'd entered through a staff entrance and gone directly to the ICU to speak with the care team and review the labs before doing anything else. Best practice, the detective told me later. You want the evidence locked down before you move. At 10:20, 2 plainclothes detectives walked into the waiting room. Derek looked up. He read their faces the same way I had, the same way anyone who'd done something terrible learns to read the approach of consequence. For a single moment, all of that practiced composure cracked. I saw it happen. I watched his face do something it had probably never done in public before, something unguarded and ugly and afraid. Then he stood up and said very calmly, "I'd like to call my lawyer." They let him make the call. Then they walked him out. I sat in the waiting room alone for a long moment. The muted television was showing weather. Partly cloudy, high of 63. I looked at it without seeing it. A nurse came down and took me upstairs. My sister was still unconscious, but her blood pressure had stabilized, and the attending physician told me they'd caught it early enough that her liver function was expected to recover fully with treatment. She would wake up. She would be okay. She would have to be told what had happened to her, and that conversation was going to be one of the hardest things I had ever done. But she would be okay. I sat in the chair beside her bed and I held her hand and I watched her breathe. My mother arrived at noon and I had to tell her everything twice because the first time she simply could not process it. We sat together in my sister's room for the rest of the afternoon, the 2 of us and the steady rhythm of the monitors, and we waited for her to wake up. She opened her eyes at 4:17 in the afternoon. The first thing she said was my name. The second thing she said, when I leaned in close so she wouldn't have to speak loudly, was, "Something was wrong, wasn't it?" Something was wrong for a long time and I know, I said. "It's okay, you're safe now. Derek is not going to be able to hurt you anymore." She closed her eyes again. She didn't ask me to explain. I think some part of her, some part that had been quietly keeping score for months even while the rest of her refused to see it, already knew. Derek was charged 3 weeks later. The forensic toxicologist report confirmed the presence of a hepatotoxic compound consistent with prolonged intentional exposure. The life insurance policy was flagged as evidence of premeditation. The DA's office reached out to their counterparts in 2 other states where investigations into Derek's former partners were being reopened. He was denied bail. My sister was in the hospital for 9 days. When she was discharged, she came and stayed with me for 6 weeks. We watched television and cooked dinner and took long walks in the evenings, and slowly, not all at once, but slowly, she started talking about it. About the ways he had isolated her without her noticing, the ways he'd made her doubt her own perception of things, the way she believed, genuinely believed, that she was tired because she wasn't trying hard enough. She is not tired anymore. She runs again. She came back to book club. She calls me on Sunday mornings. The trial date has been set. Our mother is flying in for it. The detective who handled the case told me he expects the outcome to be clear given the evidence, given the additional cases, given the fact that Derek's careful research had left a very traceable digital footprint that his lawyer was going to have a very difficult time explaining. I think about that night sometimes. The drive to the hospital, the waiting room, the charge nurse who came out to find me and said, "I need you to hear me out completely before you react." I think about what would have happened if she hadn't, if I'd walked past her and gone straight to the desk and demanded to see my sister. If Derek had overheard the wrong conversation, if any small thing had gone differently. But it didn't, and my sister is alive, and she is going to sit in that courtroom and look at the man who tried to take everything from her, and she is going to watch the jury deliver its verdict. And then she is going to walk out into the afternoon light and call me on the phone and tell me about it. I'll be waiting for that call. This time, I'll pick up before the first ring. I've thought a lot about the moment I almost didn't pick up the phone. It was 2047 in the morning and I was tired and I almost let it ring. That's the part that stays with me, not the hospital, not the waiting room, not even Derek being walked out by 2 plainclothes detectives. It's that single moment where my hand hovered over my phone and I almost chose to go back to sleep. I think about who my sister would be right now if I had, but I didn't. And I've come to believe that the choices we make in small, ordinary moments are the ones that determine nearly everything that follows. Not the dramatic ones, not the moments we prepare for. The ones that happen before we're fully awake. Before we've had time to calculate the cost. My sister trusted someone who had studied how to appear trustworthy. Derek wasn't careless or impulsive. He was methodical. He'd done research. He'd learned the precise language of care, and used it the way a key is used, not to open something, but to keep it locked in place. And my sister, who was one of the most genuinely good people I have ever known, extended to him the same quality that made her good, the willingness to believe the best about people. That quality was not the problem. The problem was that she had been taught, the way so many of us are taught, that loyalty means staying. That doubt is a character flaw. That if something feels wrong, the feeling is probably yours to fix. It isn't. One of the things I have come to understand clearly in the months since that night is this: your perception of a situation is data. When something feels wrong consistently, over time, across different circumstances, that is not anxiety. That is intelligence working the way it is supposed to work. My sister's body knew before her mind was willing to admit it. She was tired. She kept canceling plans. She stopped calling. Something in her was trying to tell her what her conscious mind was not yet ready to hear. Intelligence, real intelligence, is not just about what you know. It's about your willingness to look at what you're seeing, even when looking is uncomfortable. Even when the person doing the harm is someone you love. Even when the alternative feels easier. And courage is not the absence of fear. I was afraid every minute I sat in that waiting room next to Derek, watching him hold a coffee cup he didn't drink and perform the grief of a man whose partner was in the ICU. I was afraid when I texted that number the charge nurse had given me. I was afraid when I rode the elevator back up to the 3rd floor. Fear was present for all of it. I moved anyway, because my sister was upstairs and because the charge nurse had trusted me to hold the line, and I was not going to be the reason the line broke. What happened to my sister was not her fault. I want to be clear about that because I know she has wrestled with it, those long evenings on my couch during the 6 weeks she stayed with me. The responsibility for what Derek did belongs entirely to Derek. But what I want my sister to carry forward, what I hope anyone who hears this story carries forward, is the understanding that protecting yourself is not selfishness. Trusting your own perception is not paranoia. Asking hard questions about the people closest to you is not betrayal. It is the most honest thing you can do for yourself and for the people who love you. My sister calls me on Sunday mornings again. Last week she told me she started running again, 5 miles along the waterfront trail near her new apartment. She sounded like herself. She sounded like the person she was before 14 months of careful, invisible erosion. She is still here. That is everything. And I will pick up the phone on the first ring every time for the rest of my life.